very good. Well done, Mills. What would it take to recruit you for the next drive, Robbo?
Quite a bit.
You and me both,
amazing achievement.
You and me both.
Yeah. Well, we need to say a big congratulations. New Zealand Rugby and the Japanese Rugby Union have just signed this new agreement, this Memorandum of Understanding. Tell us what it's about, and have you been watching the breakdown and JK harping on about this Heineken Cup that he would like to see?
Well, good evening and thanks for the opportunity to be here, obviously. Before we answer that, maybe just want to reflect and acknowledge also, Bruce Robertson's passing in recent days. You guys did a great job covering Bruce's career recently and his life, and certainly from New Zealand Rugby's perspective, our heart goes out to friends and family there. Yes, JK and I have had, both publicly and behind the scenes, had a number of discussions about the opportunities that sit in Japan, and we're delighted to bring that work to conclusion now around the MOU that was talked about last week. I guess there are a lot of things that we see benefits and opportunities for sitting with this agreement. Some relate to, just strategic partnerships in that part of the world. Asia has for a long time been something that we are looking at more and more closely. There are different experiences for our leading players, both men's and women's over time. With the changes of Super, we're looking at different opportunities for different environments. And then there's obviously the commercial side, and we're excited about those opportunities too. So as it relates to the Heineken Cup concept, we've for some time now been talking about the opportunities with the global club competition. We're still working incredibly hard at that with the Northern Hemisphere, and we'd like to think we might have more news on that in coming months, but it could be something from sort of 2026 onwards we look at.
Traditionally, David Lange, our ex-Prime Minister, once said, we need to stand on our shores and embrace our neighbours, but sometimes as Kiwis we think it's the UK and France, and it certainly is from a rugby point of view. So embracing Asia, what does that look like for you? Beautiful start, I'm so excited about it. What does it look like in 5 years if it was to be successful, Robbo?
Well, the term runs through to 2027 World Cup. We're certainly keen for it to extend beyond that, as we're Japan, but we thought with all the changes potentially in the calendar we're looking at, that was a nice start over the next 5 years. I think beyond it, it's just more and more partnership in that part of the world, and that relates to having greater presence, connecting to more fans. We see North America and Asia as having a really strong fan base as it relates to our teams in black. So greater connection with fans, greater opportunities with commercial partners sitting in that part of the world. And, who knows where the competition formats or the fixture lists might take us. But at the moment, we've made a pretty solid start around club and country that we're pretty excited about.
Is there an opportunity though, like for you say about a Super Rugby, Pacifica, where we go into where guys from New Zealand could actually play for a Japanese team if that was an opportunity that sort of arose? Well,
it's always a conversation that, as you know, Millsy, comes up from time to time, and the board certainly last year at one stage had a conversation about. We're really comfortable with the eligibility laws as they sit at the moment, as we said last week. We'll keep a constant watch on what's happening in the global market and what's happening in the domestic scene, and always be open to reviewing that. But at the moment, we think that's a really strong fundamental plank in our game in terms of the strength of our national teams. And we just constantly have to be open to the flexibility of being open-minded, but at the moment that's where we stand.
The Six Nations is the Six Nations. We know that the Northern Hemisphere focus in and around that for their program. Are we going to have our own Six Nations? Is that what it's going to look like when this global calendar that you're talking about clearly finally comes to fruition? It's been around and been talked about a long time, Robbo, but in regards to this and looking at playing against our neighbours, like you talk about, maybe in Fiji, Japan, Tonga, is that a real possibility now?
Well, certainly that's a large part of what this Nations Championship competition is about. It needs 6 teams out of the Southern Hemisphere to be played every 2 years, hopefully from 2026, and we're making really good progress on that. And so there'd be a process to decide who the 2 teams coming in to join the current SANZAAR partners are. Certainly Japan and Fiji have been talked about a lot, but there could well be other promotion relegation type opportunities that bring others to the fore, as you say. Beyond that, on an annual basis around the Rugby Championship, again, we'll remain open-minded, and like a lot of the things we work on, it takes collaboration and consensus across 4 joint venture partners, so we'll just have to keep working on that. We're very clear that we see, big opportunities with Japan, and obviously with Fiji, we're working really hard to support them as well.
There could be a couple of test matches. Voce de Corridoio, Voices in the Corridor, I heard we might be playing them a couple of times.
Well, we're locked in to play one in July next year at home. We've got England here for the first 2 games in the July series, which is fantastic, obviously. 1 game against Fiji, and then we'd you know, we're working on the possibility of going back and reciprocating JK and playing in Fiji, which would be an amazing occasion. But a bit of work to go before we can sort of make any more formal announcements there.
What does that look like, Robbo? The sort of work when and that's massive. If that was to happen over in Fiji when you had a test match over there with the All Blacks travel there, what sort of work are you sort of talking about that needs to get across the line? Is it facilities? Is it, you know, what does it look like?
Yeah, well, there's a calendar. You know, one piece is a calendar piece. Regulation 9 obviously has 3 weeks in July, so it'd be, you know, us playing outside of the regulation window, which we're happy to look at. And then there's a whole number of things that our teams are working on as it relates to, you know, player assembly, facilities, tour agreements. And there's a bit of change going in and around the Fiji Rugby Union, as some of you would have seen, around their governance structures at the moment. So we just have to let that settle down a bit, and then we'll commence that work.
Is that investment? Like when you talk about a relationship with Japan, that means you'll be investing, you know, some of the income that's coming in to grow that. It's so you have to pay to go to Fiji, you have to invest to go to Japan. Is that how it works? You see it as an investment?
We do. You know, obviously you want to make sure the commercial models are sustainable, and so, you know, ideally, we're on the positive side of that whole equation, JK, as we enter into these opportunities. I mean, North America is another region that we've talked about a lot in recent times, and it just feels as we come out of COVID, with travel starting to open up a little bit more, there are more and more possibilities in this space. So North America will be an area that we'll turn our minds to a little bit more as to opportunities there, not only with as it relates to their national teams, but possibly with other national teams of significance around the world, looking to open up that market in that sort of 8-year journey through to the Rugby World Cup in 2031. And the same with the women's space there with 2033, opportunities to grow there too.
You've mentioned this global club competition and the Nations Club competition as well. Can you explain what is the difference between the two? How will they work and who will fund it?
Well, one is the club competition's obviously a club competition sitting in that window potentially in June. It has, you know, to be determined, you know, a number of teams coming out of the Southern Hemisphere and Northern Hemisphere. They would sit between our part of the world, the teams coming out of Super Rugby Pacific and Japan, competing against the best of what Europe have got to provide and again in a format to be determined over a number of weeks in that schedule there.
That's a lot of layers though, right? This is a lot of layers that are already on top of a Super Rugby competition as well. So when I look at this and is funding this sustainable? All of these layers that we have. You've got NPC. You've clearly got the growth of the women's game, which you've invested in, and you've announced the loss, but that was a strategic investment, right? Can you afford all of these layers?
Well, certainly at the international and at that premier club competition, there's really strong interest from commercial partners and broadcast partners. So that will drive, you know, a great deal of revenue that we will not only pay for the competition, but over time, as we all know, reinvest back into the game at different levels. We've still got more work to do around our, you know, the financial framework that operates across the entire game in New Zealand. But we feel, relative to other parts of the world, we're in a pretty good space at the moment. I won't go into all the accounting treatments around the loss that was reported recently, but they were, as you say, a really considered, focused a range of investments that we made at that time to set the game up as we came through COVID, and it dealt with a lot of issues we were dealing with in COVID as well. So yes, there is more value in some of these international opportunities that can fund the game and the competitions we're in.
That brings me to another point. So, you know, when the Silver Lake deal was going on, a lot of us older guys said, OK, what about the community? And we spoke about a lot of this money going into the community, and I know... So how does that actually work? How are we going to, I think, beautiful, all the stuff around the international game, but how does the community distribution of money work?
So with our provincial unions, we have a revenue share model of 17.5% of our revenue goes towards our provincial unions. So at the present time, that sits within a range of about $40 million a year going to our provinces. And we have a range of different investment opportunities and I guess strategic areas of focus that we work with them to invest in the game. And top of mind in that space at the moment is around teenagers. We're concerned about the drop-off of teenagers in the game, women and girls space, coach development, you know, there's a whole range of different things which we look to invest in there. And obviously the provinces, as it relates to the NPC unions, run their NPC teams as well. So what our challenge is balancing, to Goldie's point, all of the different priorities that our provincial unions have and working with them to create a sustainable model we hope we can invest more and more into the community game and then make sure that whole model is fit for purpose going forward.
How do we control that the provincial unions just don't spend more on their top side to come 8th?
Well, we have funding agreements with them where we've got to strike a balance between having a good degree of focus and alignment around what's important to invest in, but also give them as partners the freedom to be able to invest in areas that they see fit. And each of the 26 unions is a different entity, isn't it, with different opportunities and challenges they work with. But certainly that trend across the game is one we're mindful of around investing in that space at a provincial level more and more, to your point, where there is a potential risk for not as investing as much as we'd like to see in the community game.
So certainly, it sounds like it's amazing. You've been all over the world, mate. You've gone to France, we're back in Fiji, you're in Japan, everything else. In terms of talking about, hey, that's
good.
Yeah, exactly, it does. But you're obviously working really hard. But where is the state of the game at in New Zealand? I mean, there's often talk about there's bums on seats, viewership. So, obviously it's pretty good. Wayne Smith coming out and saying, it needs to be a faster game. Where are we at? Is there still interest in this game? Is there still players coming through, both women's and men's, that once these other players move on, that have we got the growth of the game coming through?
Oh look, we're really excited. We think the start to the year has been incredibly positive. We're seeing incredible interest as it relates to broadcast viewership with Super Rugby Pacific, back at above pre-COVID levels. So really significant broadcast interest across the competition. Our registrations in the community game, again, are nudging up towards pre-COVID levels. In fact, year on year against 2019, they're up in teenage levels of the game, up in women and girls, and significantly up in heartland levels as well. So we look at Ngāti Pro East Coast at the moment, 6 women's clubs teams, I believe, and 8 men's club teams across a population of just under 4,000 people. So incredible signs of opportunity that in our community space, that some of the things we're working on, combined with probably the inspiration of a World Cup last year, has meant that we're travelling quite well in some of those areas. But always more and more work to do. We know that the sustainability question is one, the constant growth of the community game and reinvesting back there is important. And then the shape of the game that Smithy, raised a couple of weeks or recently. I mean, I was with him a week or two before he did that podcast, and there was no surprises from me because he was very passionate about what he thought had to happen in that space. And to be honest, that's great for the game. Some people having different views about the game, the state of it, where it's going, and legendary people like him having a view is great. It creates interest. We've made a positive start, we think, around the tempo of the game in terms of what's happening in Super Rugby. But as Smithy said, there's more work to do there, more opportunity to make it better. And some of those ideas we're really strongly advocating through to World Rugby where, as I said before, we need consensus, and in the space of global law reform, we need real consensus across, over 100 members that are sitting on World Rugby now. So they're sort of no small task when you look at the shape of the game.
So just checking, you haven't switched off a game of Super Rugby this year to watch the Lions and the Serengeti?
No, I haven't. Smithy's got a lot more time on his hands at the moment, so he probably has got his eye on the Sky controller more than I have.
Just quickly, there's been Super Rugby sides are coming out and saying we'd like to be standalone. I sort of quite like the idea because I think it might help retain some of our players who get private ownership. Where do you sit on them sort of sitting out on with themselves or by themselves, or a whole tournament that's separate?
Yeah, I think we've made some really good progress in recent years about the way that we focus on that competition. And being standalone or more autonomous, JK, could mean a lot of different things, I guess. Where we've worked with our clubs is to have to give them more certainty around the licences they have, so perpetual licences. We've tried to free up some of the commercial rights that sit within them for them to be able to grow where possible revenue. But one of the key things we see as a future opportunity is something that has more focus around the governance and management of that competition in a more dedicated way. So a slightly more independent commission board and management that can help drive and have real focus 365 days of the year on that competition, which historically it hasn't had over the last 25 odd years. So we're working really closely with them there. We know there's frustration around the speed at which that can happen, but again, that comes back to a partnership we're in there with our friends from Rugby Australia, and we just have to keep working with them on that model.
We've run out of time, but just a quick yes or no question that Mills raised. If Roger Tuivasa-Sheck wanted to go back to the Warriors, would you release him?
Well, I haven't heard anything about. I've been away. I mean, that's something that our team, I'm sure, will be open to a conversation. I haven't heard that till happening.
There isn't 100 members on New Zealand, so we'll go quickly, I'm sure.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
We're going to have to
Pleasure.
make it a monthly thing because clearly there's so many questions.
Yeah, there's lots of cool stuff going on, and I guess this is a great opportunity for Share that. There's lots of things happening in this next, window, especially from 26 onwards. It's hugely exciting for the game, and there's lots of cool stuff happening domestically. So great to be able to share, and thanks for the time.